Elena Brooks had spent most of her life learning how to disappear without ever leaving the room. It was not a skill she was born with. It was something she had been forced to master, piece by piece, mistake by mistake, until invisibility became her greatest weapon. She knew how to observe without being noticed, how to listen without being heard, and most importantly, how to become exactly what others expected her to be. That was why she had been chosen. The man who gave her the assignment never wasted words. He never explained more than necessary. His power came from silence, from the kind of control that didn't need to be announced. And when he looked at Elena, he didn't see a person. He saw potential. "You're going to get close to him," he had said, "closer than anyone else ever has." That was all the instruction she needed, because the name alone carried weight. Damien Moretti, in certain circles, the name was never spoken above a whisper, not because people didn't know it, but because they knew it too well. He was not just another figure in organized crime. He was structure, precision, a system built so carefully that nothing moved without his awareness. Some called him a businessman. Others called him something far more dangerous. Elena didn't care what he was called. To her, he was a target, and targets had weaknesses. She just needed to find his. The identity she carried into his world was flawless. Every detail constructed carefully: background record, employment history, social presence. Nothing left to chance. She wasn't entering as a threat. She was entering as an opportunity. A woman with the right qualifications, the right appearance, and just enough mystery to be noticed, but not questioned. Her introduction into Damien's world came through one of his legitimate businesses, a high-end hospitality division that operated as both a front and a fortress. It was the kind of place where power dressed itself as elegance, where deals were made behind polished glass and quiet smiles. Elena fit perfectly, too perfectly. From the moment she stepped inside, she felt it, the weight of the environment, the subtle tension beneath the surface. This was not a place where people relaxed. This was a place where people watched. And Elena was no exception. Her first few days were quiet, controlled. She followed instructions, learned routines, and mapped out everything she could: entry points, security patterns, employee behavior. But more importantly, she watched him. Damien Moretti did not appear often, and when he did, the entire atmosphere shifted. It wasn't obvious. There were no announcements, no sudden movements, but people noticed, because presence like his didn't need attention. It demanded it. The first time Elena saw him, she understood immediately why he was feared. He didn't look dangerous in the way people expected. There was no visible aggression, no loud authority. Instead, there was control, absolute control. He moved through the space like everything already belonged to him, not just the building, but the people inside it. His posture was relaxed, his expression unreadable, his attention sharp without being obvious. He didn't scan the room. He assessed it, and when his eyes passed over Elena, he paused, just for a second. But it was enough, because in that brief moment, Elena felt something she hadn't expected: recognition, not familiarity, not interest, something deeper, as if he was placing her somewhere in his mind. That was the first mistake, because Elena was not supposed to stand out. She adjusted immediately, lowered her presence, controlled her movements, became quieter, less noticeable. But it was too late. He had already seen her. Days turned into a pattern. Elena continued her role perfectly. She earned trust slowly, built connections carefully, and positioned herself closer to the inner workings of the operation. But the closer she got, the more something felt wrong. Damien was not behaving the way she expected. Men like him were predictable in certain ways: suspicious, distant, ruthless. Damien was none of those things, at least not openly. He didn't interrogate her background, didn't question her presence, didn't create obstacles. Instead, he allowed her closer, too easily. That was what unsettled her, because trust, in a world like his, was never given. It was tested, and she hadn't been tested, which meant one of two things. Either he was careless, or he already knew. Elena dismissed the thought at first, because men like Damien Moretti did not overlook threats, but they also didn't act without reason. So if he wasn't stopping her, then he was watching her. That realization changed everything. Her movements became sharper, more precise, every action calculated, every word measured, because now she wasn't just observing him. She was being observed. The turning point came sooner than expected. One evening, she was called into a private section of the building, an area reserved for high-level operations. It was not a place employees entered casually, which meant this was intentional. She walked in calmly, her expression controlled, her thoughts sharp. Damien was already there, alone. That alone was unusual. Men in his position rarely isolated themselves. But he didn't look concerned. If anything, he looked comfortable. "Sit," he said. His voice was low, controlled, not aggressive, but not optional. Elena followed the instruction without hesitation, because hesitation created suspicion, and suspicion led to exposure. The room was quiet, too quiet, no distractions, no interruptions, just observation. Damien studied her without speaking, not in a way that felt inappropriate, in a way that felt precise, as if he was confirming something. "You adapt quickly," he said finally. Elena met his gaze calmly. "I do my job," she replied. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving her. "That's not what I asked." Elena felt the shift, subtle, but dangerous, because this wasn't a conversation. It was an evaluation. "I learn fast," she said. That answer was safer, more controlled. Damien nodded slightly, but his expression didn't change. "You notice things," he added. Elena didn't respond, because now every word mattered. "Most people don't," he continued. "They see what they're supposed to see." Elena held her composure. "And I don't?" she asked. Damien's lips moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Not exactly. The silence that followed was heavier, because now the tension was no longer hidden. It was direct. Elena understood something in that moment. This wasn't random. This wasn't curiosity. This was intentional. He had called her here for a reason. And whatever that reason was, it had nothing to do with her job. "You've been paying attention to me," Damien said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Elena's pulse remained steady, because denial would be a mistake, but agreement would be worse. "I pay attention to everything," she said. That was the closest thing to truth she could offer. Damien watched her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good," he said. That single word changed the direction of the entire conversation, because it was an accusation. It was approval, which made it more dangerous. "Come with me," he said. Elena didn't hesitate, because hesitation would break the rhythm. But inside, her thoughts were shifting rapidly. This was not part of the plan. This was not expected. And yet, she followed. He led her through a restricted corridor, past secured doors, deeper into the structure. This was not a test anymore. This was access. And access was power. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. This was not a place outsiders entered. This was the core, the part of his world that remained hidden, and he was showing it to her. That was the moment Elena realized something critical. Her mission had just changed, because she was no longer trying to get close to Damien Moretti. He was bringing her closer himself, and that made everything more complicated, more dangerous, more unpredictable. They stopped in front of a final door. Damien turned slightly toward her, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. "You're either very good at what you do," he said quietly. Elena held his gaze, "or very dangerous." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because the meaning was already clear. The door opened, and as Elena stepped inside, she understood one thing with absolute certainty. This was not trust. This was something else entirely. And whatever game Damien Moretti was playing, she was already deeper in it than she had planned. Her role, her mission, her control, all of it was starting to shift. Because for the first time since she entered his world, Elena Brooks was no longer sure who was watching who. And as Damien closed the door behind them, his voice came one last time. Calm, certain, unreadable. "You're not who you say you are." The words didn't sound like an accusation. They sounded like confirmation. And in that moment, Elena realized something that changed everything. Damian Moretti had known from the very beginning. The moment Damian Moretti said the words, the balance between them shifted in a way that could not be reversed. You're not who you say you are. For a brief second, Elena Brooks felt the edge of something she had spent years avoiding. Exposure. Not the kind that came from mistakes or carelessness, but the kind that came from being seen too clearly. But she did not react, because reaction was weakness, and weakness, in a place like this, was fatal. Instead, she held his gaze, her expression steady, her posture unchanged. If he expected panic, he would not get it. If he expected denial, he would not get that either. Silence stretched between them, heavy, measured, deliberate. Damian didn't repeat himself. He didn't push further. He simply watched her, as if her response, whatever it would be, was already part of something he had calculated long before this moment. That was what unsettled her the most, not the accusation, the certainty behind it. You're observant, Elena said finally, her voice calm, controlled. It wasn't an admission, but it wasn't a denial either. Damian's expression didn't change. I don't miss patterns, he replied. That single sentence revealed more than he intended, or perhaps exactly what he intended, because men like Damian Moretti didn't speak without purpose. Patterns meant time, observation, consistency, which meant he hadn't just noticed her once. He had been watching, for longer than she realized. Elena felt a quiet shift inside her thoughts. Not fear, she had moved past that. Something sharper, more focused, because now the situation was clear. She was no longer infiltrating his world unnoticed. She was inside it, under his awareness. That made every move more dangerous, and every mistake final. Damian stepped further into the room, his presence filling the space without effort. He didn't crowd her, didn't threaten her physically. He didn't need to. Control, like his, didn't rely on proximity. It relied on certainty. You adjusted too quickly, he said. Most people take time to understand how things work here. Elena tilted her head slightly. And that's a problem? She asked. Damian's gaze sharpened. It depends on why you're here. There it was. Not a direct question, but close enough. Elena didn't answer immediately, because the truth was not an option, and lies had to be chosen carefully. I was given an opportunity, she said. I took it. Damian studied her for a moment longer. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded, as if that answer was acceptable, or at least expected. That was the second thing that unsettled her, because he wasn't trying to expose her. He was allowing her to exist within the lie, which meant one thing. He had a reason, and that reason was far more dangerous than suspicion. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but mentally, because every second inside it felt like part of a larger calculation, one she wasn't fully aware of. Come, Damian said, again, not a request, not a command shouted with authority, just a direction. And Elena followed, because at this point, walking away was no longer an option. He led her deeper into the private section of his estate, beyond the visible layers of business and structure. The architecture changed subtly as they moved, less polished, more controlled, more personal. This was not the public face of power. This was where it was managed, where decisions were made, where mistakes were erased. Elena absorbed everything, the positioning of cameras, the spacing of doors, the absence of unnecessary personnel. This place was designed for one thing, control, and Damian Moretti stood at the center of it. You're trying to understand how everything works, he said without looking at her. It wasn't a question. Elena didn't deny it. That's how I learn, she replied. Damian stopped walking, turned slightly toward her. And what have you learned so far? The question was simple, but the answer was not, because the truth would reveal too much, and the wrong lie would reveal everything. Elena chose carefully. That nothing here is accidental, she said. Damian's expression shifted, just slightly. Approval, but not the kind that came easily, the kind that was earned. That's correct, he said. And for a moment, the tension eased, not disappeared, but changed, because now she wasn't just being observed. She was being evaluated, and somehow she was passing. They continued walking, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It was active, filled with unspoken questions, unanswered truths, and something else. Something Elena didn't expect. Curiosity, not just from her, from him. That was dangerous, because curiosity led to attention, and attention led to exposure. They entered another room, this one different from the others, larger, but quieter. No visible technology, no obvious purpose, just space, controlled, intentional. This is where I think, Damien said. Elena glanced around, because this was not what she expected. A man like him didn't step away from control. He lived inside it, but this space felt separate, almost isolated. You don't bring people here, she said. It wasn't a question. Damien looked at her. No, he said. That answer landed with weight, because it meant one thing. She wasn't supposed to be here, which raised a more important question. Why was she? Elena felt something shift again, because this wasn't just strategy anymore. This was something personal, and personal was unpredictable. You trust me? She asked. The question came out before she could stop it. Damien didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked past her slightly, his gaze moving across the room. I don't trust anyone, he said. That sounded like the truth, but it didn't explain this. Then why am I here? She asked. Damien stopped, turned, and this time there was something different in his eyes. Not softness, not weakness, but something close to interest. Because you don't behave like the others, he said. Elena held his gaze. And that makes me what? She asked. Damien took a step closer. Not enough to intimidate, just enough to shift the space between them. Unpredictable, he said. That word carried weight, because unpredictability could be useful or dangerous, and in his world, it was often both. Elena felt the tension build again, stronger now, more direct, because this was no longer about observation. This was about positioning, and she was being placed somewhere specific. You've been betrayed before, she said quietly. The words were calculated, a risk, but necessary one, because she needed to understand him, not just avoid him. For the first time, Damien's expression changed, not visibly, but enough. A pause, a shift in stillness. Yes, he said. That single word carried more weight than anything else he had said, because men like him did not admit weakness, unless it wasn't weakness anymore, unless it had become something else, something colder, something permanent. That's why you watch everything, Elena continued. Damien didn't deny it. Trust is expensive, he said, and people rarely earn it. Elena's voice softened slightly. And yet you're giving me access. Damien studied her again, longer this time, as if weighing something. Not her identity, not her lie, something deeper. You haven't given me a reason not to, he said. That answer should have been reassuring, but it wasn't, because it meant the opposite was also true. One mistake, one misstep, and everything would end. Elena looked away briefly, because for the first time, something unexpected surfaced. Not fear, not calculation, something else. Conflict, because Damien Moretti was not what she expected. He was not reckless, not blindly cruel, not careless with power. He was controlled, measured, and in a way, honest, not in words, but in behavior. That made him more dangerous and harder to betray. Elena felt the shift inside her again, subtle, but real, because this was no longer just a mission. It was becoming something else, something complicated, something personal. She pushed the thought aside, because she couldn't afford it. Not here, not now. Damien moved toward a wall she hadn't noticed before. There were no visible handles, no clear entry points, just a seamless surface. He placed his hand against it. A soft mechanism clicked, and part of the wall shifted open. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, because this was different, more hidden, more secure, more important. Damien turned back toward her, and for the first time since this began, he made something clear. not through words, through action. "Come with me," he said. Elena didn't move immediately, because now, this crossed a line, a clear one. This wasn't access to operations or observation. This was something deeper, something no outsider should see, which meant one thing. He had made a decision, and she didn't know why. "What is this?" she asked. Damien's answer came without hesitation. "The part no one else sees." That sentence changed everything, because now the risk was no longer just hers. It was his. Elena stepped forward slowly, because refusing was not an option, and accepting meant stepping deeper into something she might not control. She crossed the threshold. The space inside was darker, not in lighting, but in meaning. Files, records, connections, information layered with precision. This wasn't just a private room. This was his foundation, the truth behind everything. Elena felt the weight of it immediately, because this was what she had been sent to find. But now that she was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like something else, something heavier, because access came with consequence, and consequence was already closing in. Damien stepped in behind her. The door sealed shut, and his voice followed, calm, certain, unavoidable. "Now you're part of this." Elena didn't turn around, because she understood something fully now. She was no longer pretending to be inside his world. She was inside it, completely, and there was no way back. As her eyes moved across the hidden room, one realization settled deeper than anything else. Damien Moretti hadn't just seen through her lies. He had chosen to keep her anyway, and that choice was far more dangerous than exposure. The hidden room did not feel like a place meant for secrets. It felt like a place where secrets were controlled. Elena Brooks stood still for a moment, her eyes scanning the walls lined with organized files, digital systems, and carefully structured records. Everything inside this space reflected the same thing she had begun to understand about Damien Moretti. Nothing in his world existed without purpose. Not people, not information, not even her. That realization settled deeper than anything else, because now she wasn't just inside his empire. She was inside the truth behind it, and truth had a way of forcing things to the surface. Things she had buried, things she had avoided, things she had built her entire life around escaping. Elena moved slowly across the room, her steps controlled, her expression unchanged. But inside, something was shifting, something she could no longer ignore. Because this mission was never about money, never about loyalty, and never about opportunity. It was about something far more personal. Something that started long before Damien Moretti ever knew her name. Years earlier, Elena had lived a life that felt ordinary, not perfect, not easy, but stable. Her family had been small, but close. Her father, Daniel Brooks, had been a quiet man, disciplined, thoughtful, and deeply protective. He didn't speak much about his work, but there was always something beneath the surface. Something Elena noticed even as a child. Long hours, unexpected calls, moments where his attention shifted instantly, as if something invisible demanded it. At the time, she didn't question it, because children didn't look for danger in the people they trusted. They assumed safety, until something broke it. The night everything changed didn't come with warning. It came with silence. A silence so complete that it felt unnatural. Elena remembered waking up to it. No movement in the house. No sound from the television. No footsteps. Just stillness. And then, voices. Low, unfamiliar, controlled. She didn't understand what was happening at first. Her mind tried to place the moment into something normal, something safe. But nothing about it felt safe. She stepped into the hallway quietly, her movements slow, careful. And that was when she saw them, men she had never seen before, standing inside her home like they belonged there. Their presence wasn't chaotic. It wasn't loud. It was precise, deliberate, dangerous. Her father stood in front of them, not afraid, but not in control either. There was something in his posture she had never seen before. Tension, real tension. Not the kind he had behind calm words and quiet authority. The kind that came from knowing the outcome had already been decided. Elena didn't hear everything, just fragments, words that didn't make sense at the time, names, warnings, and one sentence that stayed with her longer than anything else. You should have stayed out of it. She didn't understand what it was. She only understood what came next. Everything moved quickly after that. Too quickly. Too final. Her father was gone. Her home was no longer safe. And the life she knew ended. What followed was not chaos. It was silence. Carefully constructed silence. Official reports that didn't match reality. Explanations that didn't answer questions. People who told her to move on without ever telling her why. Elena learned something important during that time. Truth wasn't always hidden. Sometimes it was erased. Years passed, but the memory never left her. It changed, evolved, became sharper, more focused, because as she grew older, Elena began to understand something she couldn't see as a child. Her father hadn't been random. His death hadn't been random. And the men who walked into their home didn't belong to chance. They belonged to something organized, something powerful, something controlled. That was when she started searching. Not loudly, not recklessly, quietly, carefully, piece by piece, until she found it. A name, not spoken openly, not written clearly, but present enough to matter. Moretti. At first, it was just a connection, a thread, something small, but the deeper she looked, the clearer it became. That name appeared in places it shouldn't, linked to operations that didn't officially exist, connected to people who never appeared on record, and always, hidden behind layers of control. That was the moment Elena made her decision. She would get closer, not for revenge, not yet, for truth, because truth came before anything else, and truth required access. The opportunity came years later, not by accident, but by design. The man who approached her knew exactly what he was offering. Access to Damian Moretti, a way inside his world. No explanations, no guarantees, just one instruction. Get close. Elena didn't hesitate, because by that point, her path was already set. She didn't need motivation. She needed proximity. And now, she had it. Standing inside Damian's hidden room, Elena felt the weight of that decision more clearly than ever, because the man she had spent years believing was responsible didn't match what she was seeing. Damian Moretti was not careless, not impulsive, not reckless enough to leave loose ends. Everything about him suggested control, precision, awareness, which created a problem, because if he had been involved, it wouldn't have been messy, it wouldn't have been uncertain. It would have been clean, final, and her father's death had not been clean. That contradiction settled into her thoughts, creating something she didn't expect. Doubt. Elena moved toward one of the secured systems, her eyes scanning the interface without touching it, because now, this was no longer just about gathering information. This was about understanding something deeper. Had she been wrong? The question felt dangerous, because everything she had built, everything she had believed, rested on one assumption, that Damian Moretti was connected to her past. But what if he wasn't? What if the truth was more complicated? That thought created something else. Conflict. Because if Damian wasn't responsible, then someone else was. And that someone was still out there, still hidden, still controlling the narrative she had been chasing for years. Elena felt her focus sharpen again, because doubt didn't mean stopping. It meant looking deeper. She needed proof, not assumptions, not connections. Proof. Her attention shifted to a section of the room she hadn't noticed before. More restricted, more controlled. The kind of place where only the most important information would be kept. She hesitated for a moment, not out of fear, out of awareness, because crossing that line would change everything. But she stepped forward anyway, because she had already come too far to stop now. As she moved closer, something caught her attention. A name. Familiar. Too familiar. Brooks. Her breath slowed slightly. Not visibly, but enough for her to feel it. Because that wasn't coincidence. That wasn't random. That was deliberate. Elena reached toward the file, her finger stopping just before contact. Because now, This wasn't just information. This was her past. And once she opened it, there would be no going back. She pulled it open. The contents inside were not what she expected. There were no reports of destruction, no records of execution, no direct connection to an order. Instead, there were notes, observations, surveillance records, not of her father, of her. Elena's eyes moved quickly across the pages. Dates, locations, details she didn't realize anyone had been tracking. And then, one line stood out. Clear, undeniable. Subject remained protected. No interference authorized. Elena froze, because that sentence didn't fit anything she believed. Protected, not targeted, not eliminated. Protected. Her mind raced through the implications. If Damien Moretti had access to this, if this was part of the system, then everything changed, because it meant one thing. He hadn't been hunting her. He had been watching her, making sure no one else did. Elena felt something shift again, stronger this time, because this wasn't doubt anymore. This was realization. Her entire mission, her entire purpose, had been built on incomplete truth, and incomplete truth was dangerous because it led to the wrong enemy. Her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the file, because now the question wasn't whether Damien Moretti was involved. It was how and why. Behind her, the room remained silent, but she was no longer thinking about the space, or the mission, or the risk. She was thinking about one thing. If Damien had been protecting her, then someone else had been hunting her, and that someone was still hidden, still powerful, still waiting. Elena closed the file slowly, because now she understood something she hadn't before. This was never just about revenge. It was about truth buried under layers of control, and the deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. Her breathing steadied again, her focus sharpened, because the path forward had changed, but it hadn't ended, not even close. As she turned slightly, her eyes moving toward the closed door, one final thought settled into place. Damien Moretti had known about her long before she entered his world, and he hadn't stopped her. He had allowed her to come closer, which meant he wanted her here for a reason she still didn't understand. And that reason was more dangerous than anything she had uncovered so far. The truth Elena Brooks had uncovered inside Damien Moretti's hidden room did not bring her clarity. It brought her deeper into uncertainty, because everything she believed about him had started to break apart, and what replaced it was far more dangerous than hatred. It was doubt, and doubt, in a world built on control, was the most unstable position a person could stand in. Elena left the hidden room with her composure intact, her movements controlled, her expression unreadable. But internally, nothing remained the same. The man she was sent to betray had not only allowed her into his most guarded space, he had unknowingly revealed something that could dismantle everything she thought she understood about her past. Or perhaps, not unknowingly, that thought stayed with her, because Damien Moretti was not careless. Nothing he did was accidental, which meant one thing. If she had seen those files, he had allowed it. The question was not why she had access. The question was why he wanted her to have it. The following days shifted in a way Elena had not expected. The environment inside Damien's empire changed, not visibly to outsiders, but to someone like her. The difference was clear. Security tightened. Movements became more restricted. Conversations shortened. And most importantly, tension grew. Not the quiet, controlled tension she had grown used to. Something sharper, more immediate, something approaching conflict. Elena observed everything carefully, because now every change meant something, and every meaning pointed to something larger. Word spread quietly through internal channels, not spoken directly, but understood. Rival families were moving. Pressure was building from outside, and Damien Moretti was at the center of it. He did not react the way others would. There were no visible signs of concern, no urgency, no sudden aggression. Instead, he became more controlled, more precise, which meant the situation was serious, because men like him only sharpen when necessary. Elena watched him during this time more closely than ever before. not as a target, not even as a threat, but as something she needed to understand, because the more she observed, the more complicated he became. Damien was ruthless when required. That part was clear. But he was also calculated in ways that didn't match the chaos of typical power. He didn't act emotionally. He didn't react impulsively. He made decisions like someone playing a long game, one that others couldn't see. And somehow, Elena had become part of that game. That realization settled heavily inside her, because now she was no longer just gathering information. She was involved. And involvement came with consequence. The shift became undeniable the night of the gathering. It was not announced as anything unusual, but Elena recognized it immediately. High-level presence, selective invitations, security at its highest level. This was not a social event. This was strategy. Power dressed as elegance. Elena entered the space with the same controlled confidence she had maintained since the beginning. But this time, something felt different. Eyes followed her. Not out of curiosity, out of awareness, because her position had changed. And everyone knew it. She wasn't just another face in Damien's world anymore. She was closer, too close. That alone made her a subject of attention. Damien arrived later than expected, not rushed, not dramatic. But the moment he entered, everything shifted. Silence didn't fall, but focus did, because control had just walked into the room. Elena watched him from a distance, as always, but this time, he didn't ignore her presence. He acknowledged it, subtly, deliberately, and then he moved toward her. That alone sent a quiet ripple through the room, because men like Damien Moretti did not approach without purpose. Elena remained still, composed, but internally alert, because this was not routine. This was intentional. He stopped in front of her, close enough to command attention, not close enough to appear personal. Balance. Always balance. You've adapted well, he said. His voice was calm, controlled, but the words carried weight. Elena met his gaze. I learned quickly, she replied. The exchange was simple, but nothing about it was casual, because beneath the surface, there was something else, something unspoken, something building. Damien's eyes remained on her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he shifted his attention slightly, not away, but outward, as if including the room in what came next. That was the moment Elena felt it, the shift, not in the room, in him, because whatever he was about to do, it wasn't part of the expected structure. You understand how things work here, Damien said. It wasn't directed only at her, but it was meant for her. Elena didn't respond, because now, this wasn't a conversation. This was positioning. You understand the importance of loyalty, he continued. Still calm, still controlled. But something underneath was changing. Elena held her composure. Yes, she said. That was the truth, but not the whole truth. Damien nodded once. Then, without warning, he said something that broke the entire structure of expectation. Then you understand why I need a wife. The words didn't fit the moment. They didn't fit the setting. They didn't fit anything. And yet, they landed with absolute precision, because they were not a question. They were a statement. Elena's mind reacted instantly, but her expression did not, because reaction would expose everything. And this was something she had not prepared for. The room didn't erupt, but it changed. Subtly, eyes shifted, attention sharpened, because everyone understood what those words meant, but no one expected them, least of all, her. Damien's gaze returned fully to Elena, focused, certain, unwavering. You will marry me, he said, not loudly, not forcefully, but with the kind of control that made refusal feel impossible. For the first time since entering his world, Elena felt something she could not immediately control. Shock, not visible, but real, because this changed everything. Her mission, her position, her purpose. Marriage was not proximity. It was integration. It meant access beyond anything she had planned, but it also meant risk beyond anything she could control. Her thoughts moved rapidly, analyzing, breaking down possibilities. Why? Why her? Strategy? Control? Protection? Or something else? Something more dangerous? Because men like Damien Moretti did not act without reason, and marriage was not a casual decision. It was power, image, structure, especially now, with rival families moving, with pressure increasing. Marriage would send a message: stability, control, authority. But that still didn't explain one thing. Why her? Elena held his gaze, because now this was no longer just about him. It was about her choice. And choices in this world came with consequences. You trust me, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a test. Damien didn't hesitate. I don't need to, he replied. That answer was more dangerous than trust, because it meant he didn't rely on it. He relied on control, which meant if she accepted, she wouldn't just be his wife. She would be part of his system, and systems like his did not allow failure. Elena felt the weight of the moment settle completely, because now she stood at a point where everything connected: her past, her mission, her doubts, her growing understanding of him, and something else, something she hadn't planned for: emotion, not strong, not overwhelming, but present, because Damien Moretti was not what she expected, and that made him harder to betray. That thought stayed with her, because it mattered more than anything else. The room remained silent, waiting, watching, because everyone understood this decision would change everything. Elena took a slow breath, not visible, not obvious, but enough to steady her thoughts, because hesitation would cost her control, and control was everything. If she refused, she lost access, she lost position, she lost a chance to uncover the full truth. If she accepted, she gained everything, but also risked everything, because marriage meant one thing: there would be no distance left, no separation, no safety. She would be inside his world completely, and if he ever decided she didn't belong there, there would be no escape. But there was one truth she couldn't ignore. She needed answers about her past, about the protection file, about why he had allowed her into his world. And those answers would not come from the outside, only from within. Her decision formed quietly, carefully, with full awareness of what it meant. Elena looked at him, directly, without hesitation, and in that moment, she made the choice that would change everything. Yes, she said. The word was simple, controlled, final, but beneath it, everything shifted, because this was not acceptance, not completely. This was strategy. This was positioning. This was entry into the deepest part of his world. The room reacted subtly, not loudly, but enough, because everyone understood what had just happened. Power had just been reinforced. Control had just been secured. And Elena Brooks had just become something far more dangerous than a spy. She had become part of Damien Moretti's empire, completely, irreversibly. Damien's expression didn't change, but something in his gaze did. Not victory, not satisfaction. Something else, something unreadable, because he understood this wasn't just a marriage, it was a decision, and decisions like this always came with consequences. Elena held her composure, because now the game had changed. Completely, she had stepped inside willingly, and from this point forward, there would be no turning back. But beneath the surface, beneath the control, beneath the calculated decision, there was one truth she could not ignore. She had just agreed to marry the man she was sent to destroy. And as the room slowly returned to movement, Elena Brooks understood something with absolute clarity. Her mission had not ended. It had just begun again, from inside the marriage. Marriage did not change Elena Brooks' position in Damien Moretti's world. It erased the distance. What had once been observation became immersion. What had once required strategy now demanded instinct. There were no longer barriers between her and the truth, only layers she had yet to fully understand. The transition into his mansion was seamless on the surface. Everything was prepared, everything expected, everything controlled. Elena entered not as an outsider trying to fit in, but as someone already placed exactly where she was meant to be. That realization unsettled her more than anything else, because it suggested something she could no longer ignore. She had not just entered his world. She had been anticipated. The mansion itself was not simply a home. It was a structure of power disguised as luxury. Every hallway carried silence. Every room carried intention, and every person inside it knew exactly where they stood. Now, Elena stood at the center of it. As Damien's wife, the title changed everything. People no longer watched her with curiosity. They watched her with calculation, because proximity to Damien Moretti did not grant safety. It attracted attention, and attention, in his world, was always dangerous. The first days passed in controlled adjustment. Elena learned the internal structure of the mansion quickly, not as a guest, but as someone expected to understand. Staff interaction, security rotations, access restrictions. Everything became clearer. But more importantly, Damien became clearer, not as a figure of power, but as a man. And that was where everything became complicated. Because Damien Moretti did not behave like someone who had just gained control over a strategic asset. He behaved like someone who had made a decision, a deliberate one. He did not question her movements, did not monitor her visibly, did not impose limitations beyond what already existed. Instead, he gave her space, not distance, but freedom within control. That difference mattered, because it suggested trust, or something dangerously close to it. Elena noticed it in small moments. The way he adjusted conversations when she entered a room, not to hide information, but to include her. The way he positioned her beside him during internal discussions, not behind, not separate. The way his attention shifted toward her, not constantly, not possessively, but deliberately, measured, intentional. It was not affection in the traditional sense. It was something quieter, something harder to define. Respect. That realization created something Elena had not prepared for. Conflict. Because respect was not something she could easily betray. And yet, that was exactly why she was here. The nights inside the mansion were different, not because they were calmer, but because they were more revealing. Without the presence of external pressures, without the structure of public image, Damien's behavior shifted slightly. Not enough for others to notice, but enough for her. He was still controlled, still precise, but less distant. There were moments, brief, quiet moments, where the weight of his position seemed to settle around him rather than within him. Moments where he allowed stillness. And Elena saw something in those moments that complicated everything further. He wasn't just powerful. He was burdened, not by guilt, but by responsibility. The kind that didn't allow mistakes. The kind that didn't allow weakness. The kind that didn't allow trust. And yet, he had chosen her. That thought stayed with her longer than it should have, because it raised a question she could no longer ignore. Why? Why her? Not as a strategic decision, not as a necessity, but as a choice. Elena began to look deeper into his world, not just through systems or records, but through behavior. And what she found did not match the narrative she had built for years. Damien Moretti was not chaotic, not reckless, not blindly violent. Every action had structure. Every decision had purpose. And most importantly, every threat was managed, which made one thing clear. If something had destroyed her family, it had not been his style. That realization did not bring relief. It brought something worse, uncertainty, because uncertainty meant she had been chasing the wrong answer. And the deeper she looked, the more that possibility grew. Elena shifted her focus. If Damien was not the enemy, then someone inside his world might be, because power like his did not exist without internal tension, without hidden fractures, without betrayal. And betrayal was always closest to the center. She began observing the inner circle more carefully, not openly, not directly, but through patterns, through behavior, through absence of behavior, because betrayal rarely revealed itself through action. It revealed itself through inconsistency. There were several individuals within Damien's closest circle, trusted, positioned, integrated, but one stood out, not because he drew attention, but because he avoided it too perfectly. Marcus Vale. He had been with Damien for years. Long enough to be trusted. Long enough to understand the structure. Long enough to hide within it. Elena noticed the subtle shifts, the delayed responses, the moments where information passed through him but did not align perfectly. Nothing obvious. Nothing provable. But enough. Enough to create suspicion. She didn't act immediately, because acting without certainty was a mistake she could not afford. Instead, she watched, waited, collected, and slowly, the pattern formed. Marcus was not just part of the system. He was manipulating it, not in large, visible ways, but in small, precise adjustments. Enough to influence outcomes. Enough to redirect attention. Enough to create openings. Openings for what? Elena didn't know yet, but she knew one thing. He was not loyal. And that changed everything, because now, the danger was no longer external. It was internal, and internal threats were harder to control. Elena felt the pressure build again, but this time, it wasn't just about her mission. It was about survival, because she was no longer standing outside the conflict. She was in the center of it, between two sides, one she had been sent by, and one she had begun to understand. That position was unstable, and instability led to collapse. Her ability to continue her original mission became more difficult, because the information she was uncovering no longer aligned with the purpose she was given. Every new detail contradicted the old narrative. Every truth replaced an assumption. And the deeper she went, the more dangerous the truth became. Not just for Damien, for her. Because if she had been misled, then the person who sent her had a different objective, one she had not fully understood. That realization stayed with her, growing, building, until it became impossible to ignore. The moment came unexpectedly, as most dangerous moments did, not through confrontation, not through action, but through information. Elena accessed a secure communication channel she had not used since entering the mansion, carefully, quietly, without leaving a trace, because now she needed answers, not assumptions, not possibilities. Answers. The response came quickly, too quickly, which meant one thing. They had been waiting for her to reach this point, waiting for her to be inside, waiting for her to be exactly where she was now. That realization alone was enough to shift everything. But what came next changed it completely. The instructions were simple, direct, unmistakable. Proceed with final phase. Elena's focus sharpened instantly. Final phase. That wasn't surveillance. That wasn't information gathering. That was conclusion. She continued reading, because now every word mattered. Target must be eliminated. The sentence didn't need clarification. It didn't need explanation, because there was only one target. Damien Moretti. Elena's hand remained steady, but her thoughts shifted completely, because now everything aligned. The manipulation, the access, the placement, the timing. This had never been about information. It had always been about elimination, and she had been placed inside his life to make it possible. That truth settled heavily, because it meant one thing. The person who sent her was not just using her. They were controlling the outcome, and Damien was the outcome. Elena leaned back slightly, her breathing controlled, her expression unchanged. But inside, everything had shifted, because now the mission was no longer unclear. It was undeniable. She had been sent to destroy the man she had just begun to understand, the man who had protected her, without her knowing, the man who trusted her enough to bring her into his world, and the man she could no longer see as the enemy. That was the moment everything broke, not externally, internally, because now there was no safe choice, only consequences. And as Elena closed the communication channel slowly, one truth remained unavoidable. The person who sent her to spy was planning Damien Moretti's murder, and she was the key to making it happen. The truth did not arrive as a shock. It settled slowly, heavily, like something that had always been there, but had only now been seen clearly. Elena Brooks stood in the silence of the private study. The The message still fresh in her mind, its meaning impossible to ignore. The mission she believed in, the purpose that guided every decision she made, had never been about justice. It had been about control, and she had been part of it from the beginning, not as a strategist, not as a partner, but as a tool. That realization did not break her. It sharpened her, because now she understood something far more dangerous than the mission itself. She understood the man behind it, Victor Kane. The name carried weight in a way that did not rely on fear alone. It was quieter than that, more calculated, more patient. Victor Kane was not a man who built empires through force. He built them through manipulation, through positioning, through people. And Elena had been one of those people. The connection became clearer the more she allowed herself to see it. Victor had not chosen her randomly. He had studied her past, her pain, her need for answers. And then he had given her a direction, a target, a purpose that felt like justice, but was never meant to be. It had always been about Damien Moretti, and removing him, not for revenge, not for truth, but for power. Elena exhaled slowly, her thoughts aligning with a clarity she had never experienced before. Every step she had taken, every decision she had made, had been anticipated, planned, controlled, and now she stood inside the very empire Victor wanted to destroy. That meant one thing. She was no longer just part of the plan. She was the final piece of it. The study door opened quietly behind her. Elena didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to, because she already knew who it was. Damien Moretti. His presence filled the room without effort. Silent, measured, unavoidable. "You've been busy," he said calmly. Elena turned slowly, because this moment had been coming. She just hadn't known when or how. But now, there was no avoiding it. Damien stood near the doorway, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, focused, unforgiving. Not angry, not yet, but aware, completely aware. "How long?" he asked. The question was simple, but the weight behind it was not. Elena didn't respond immediately, because the answer mattered, not just for him, for her. "For longer than I should have," she said finally. Damien nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. "You were sent to me," he said. Not a question, a fact. Elena didn't deny it. "Yes." The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before, because now everything was exposed. No more assumptions, no more uncertainty, just truth. Damien stepped closer, not aggressively, not threateningly, but deliberately. "You were supposed to watch me," he continued. Elena held his gaze. "Yes." And then, that question carried more weight than the others, because it pointed to something deeper, something final. Elena's voice didn't change. "Then I was supposed to help destroy you." The words landed between them, without hesitation, without fear, because at this point, fear was irrelevant. Damien didn't react immediately, but something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, not anger, something more controlled, more dangerous, understanding. "Victor Kane," he said quietly. Elena's chest tightened slightly, because hearing the name here, in this space, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Yes," she said. Damien exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had already been holding on to. "I suspected," he said. Elena frowned slightly. "You knew?" "Not everything," Damien replied, "but enough." That answer didn't bring relief. It brought something else. Complexity. Because if he knew, then everything that happened after that knowledge was a choice. Then why let it continue? Elena asked. Damien's eyes remained locked on hers. "Because I needed to see how far it went." Elena processed that, because it meant he had allowed her to stay, allowed her to move closer, allowed her to become part of his life, even knowing what she was. That was a risk, she said. Damien didn't deny it. "Yes." "Why take it?" That question mattered more than the rest, because it cut through everything else. All the strategy, all the control, all the calculation, and for something real. Damien didn't answer immediately, because the truth was not simple. Because you didn't act like the others, he said finally. Elena's expression didn't change. But I still betrayed you. Damien's voice remained steady. Yes. The honesty hit harder than anger would have, because anger could be defended against. Truth could not. Elena looked at him carefully now, not as a target, not as a mission, but as a man who had been placed in a position he did not choose. You should kill me, she said. The words were calm, direct, unemotional, because in this world, that was a logical outcome. Damien didn't react immediately, but the silence that followed was not empty. It was decision, measured, precise, final. You're right, he said. Elena didn't move, because she had already accepted it. This was a consequence. This was a cost. This was how it ended. But then, Damien took another step forward, and everything changed. But I'm not going to, he said. Elena's eyes shifted slightly, because that was not expected. Why? She asked. Damien's answer came without hesitation. Because you're not the real enemy. That sentence changed everything, because it confirmed what she had already begun to understand. Victor Kane was not just behind the mission. He was the architect of everything. The manipulation, the deception, the positioning. All of it. Elena exhaled slowly. He used me, she said. Damien nodded. Yes. And now he's going to finish it. That part was inevitable, because Victor didn't leave plans incomplete. He ended them, decisively. He's already started, Damien said. Elena's focus sharpened instantly. What do you mean? Damien moved toward the desk, picking up a file and placing it in front of her. Internal breaches, he said. Small ones at first, then larger. Elena looked down at the information. Patterns, disruptions, miscommunications. Everything she had been noticing confirmed. It's not random, she said. No, Damien replied. It's coordinated. Elena looked back at him. He's inside your empire. Damien's expression hardened slightly. Yes, that was the real danger, not the attack itself. But where it was coming from? Because internal threats were the hardest to eliminate. Marcus Vale, Elena said quietly. Damien didn't react with surprise, because he already knew. You've been watching him, he said. Elena nodded. He's not loyal. No, Damien agreed. He isn't. The confirmation settled heavily, because now the situation was clear. Victor Kane wasn't just attacking from outside. He had embedded himself inside, through people, through influence, through control. And now he was pulling everything apart from within. Elena stepped back slightly, her thoughts moving faster now, sharper, more focused, because this was no longer about past mistakes. It was about what came next. What's his end goal? She asked. Damien's answer came without hesitation. Remove me, he said. Take control of what's left. Elena understood, because that was how Victor worked. Not destruction. Replacement. He didn't break systems. He took them over. And I was supposed to make that easier, she said. Damien looked at her. Yes. The truth was clear now, unavoidable, complete. Elena stood there for a moment, then spoke. I can help you stop him. The words were not emotional, not desperate, just clear, direct. Damien didn't respond immediately, because this was the decision. Trust her, or end her, and both options carried risk. You expect me to trust you, he said. Elena met his gaze. No, she replied. I expect you to use me. That answer mattered, because it wasn't about redemption. It was about value. And in his world, value determined survival. Damien studied her carefully, measuring, evaluating, deciding. You know how he thinks, he said. Elena nodded. Yes. You know how he moves. Yes. And you know what he wants. Elena's voice remained steady. Power. The room fell silent again. But this time, the silence was different. It wasn't tension. It was calculation. Because now, the situation had changed. Elena was no longer a threat. She was an asset. But assets, could still be dangerous. Damien stepped closer, stopping just in front of her. "You get one chance," he said. Elena didn't hesitate. "I won't waste it." Damien held her gaze for a moment longer, then made his decision. "You're going to help me bring him down." The words were final, irreversible, and with them, everything shifted again, because now they were no longer on opposite sides. They were aligned, not by trust, not by loyalty, but by necessity. Victor Kane had started this, and now they were going to finish it. Elena felt something settle inside her. Not relief, not confidence, something stronger, purpose, because for the first time, she wasn't following a plan. She was choosing one. Damien turned slightly, his focus already shifting toward the next move. "Get ready," he said. Elena nodded, because she knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Victor Kane wasn't the kind of man who made mistakes. He was the kind of man who anticipated outcomes. And if he had planned this far, then he was already preparing for what came next, which meant they were already behind. And as Elena stepped out of the study, one final realization settled in her mind. Victor Kane hadn't lost control of the situation. He had simply moved it to the next stage, and now they were walking straight into it.